The year is over, and it's time to talk about what I read in 2018, I guess. This is the thing people do. Obviously, I mostly don't make the same kinds of videos as a lot of the other people who talk about books on YouTube, but I did think it would be fun to talk about the previous year and what I read and talk about some stats. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting, especially because then, theoretically, if I'm still messing around with this stuff at the end of this year, I can compare. So I have a Goodreads account, and I have had it for like 8 years. But I have on there all of the books I read this year, and it tells me how many there are and whatnot. So I read 38 books this year. And for the last few years, I've been doing the challenge where at the beginning of the year you pick a number and you're challenging yourself to reach that number of books. And then basically, whenever I finished it, the next year, I would say I'm going to read one more book than that. Well, my challenge this year was to read 28 books. So I read 10 more than that, and I don't know what happened. I don't know how this occurred, because I was not more or less busy this year than I was last year. They were identical. Obviously I understand why I'm reading more than I was in grad school, but I wasn't in grad school last year either, so what's going on? And by last year, I mean 2017. So I don't know why there's such a huge difference. And yes, I was listening to audiobooks, but I was doing that in 2017 too. So I don't know. So I have come up with some categories that I sort of made up and written down some stats. So let's talk about this. Yeah. So 38 books, right? And not all of the counting that I did is 100% accurate, but this little data section is actually accurate, pretty much. So first I counted how many books I read by men versus by women. Just binary genders, ruined it for the rest of us, but we're just going to pretend that's all there is, because I don't actually want to look up every single author in detail, because I'm lazy. So obviously I read a number of books this year that were by multiple people, because they were short story collections. So in those cases, provided there were men and women involved, I just counted it for both. So this isn't actually this is gonna add up to a bigger number than 30. So counting the number of men and women. Men was 24. 24 books by men or with stories by men. And for women was 16. So that's obviously a number more by men, but it's honestly more parity, closer to parity than I would have expected. Because I don't go out of my way to read books by women necessarily. So the fact that I kind of prefer to read sci-fi definitely skews it towards men most of the time, because there's just more famous dudes who wrote sci-fi. But if I have any goal for the future, it'd be nice if the number was closer to even. And but I'm not going to actually I shouldn't read a book by this dude in order to do that, because I'm just doing this for fun. It's nice to kind of see how it shakes out. Mostly I think it'll be interesting to compare to next year, if anything changes at all, or if this is just kind of how we roll. So then I tried to divide the books by some general categories, but sometimes it's really hard to know what category a book should go in. So, yikes. But basically, yeah, so I split it I counted, nonfiction, which I read 12 nonfiction books. And that's less than half, but it's not that much less than half. And that's actually a fairly large amount, although the breakdown of what the books were actually about was a little bit depressing. I didn't write it down in here, but I only read 2 books this year, maybe 3, that were about science. I mostly read nonfiction books about history, which I find really interesting to read, but like I would like to read more about science. I think in the past I have done that, but this year was just not a good year for that. I don't know why. Okay, so then within fiction. Within fiction categories, science fiction, 12 books, fantasy, 5, mystery thriller, 4, and that's not necessarily a book that everyone would count as a mystery thriller, but like just it's kind of where I dump anything that's a mystery. So they're not all thrillers. Historical fiction, 3, and then contemporary, 2, because like I didn't know what to do with the books basically, and I'm not sure. Historical fiction is like basically just where I dumped some books that were set in the past and don't fit into another category. Like I think The Essex Serpent was a historical fiction because I was like, it's historical fiction. I don't know what else to call it. Like I wasn't counting like literary fiction because I don't really read much of that, and I don't find super interesting as a category. I don't know. I was trying to use some of the same categories that I do on my Goodreads shelves, but they're like said inadequate, and there are some places, books that I just like didn't categorize because this is like, I don't know what this is. Okay, so yeah, so mostly sci-fi. Yeah, it's basically sci-fi, half sci-fi. Yeah, so I would say the books I read are like equal parts nonfiction, science fiction, and then other stuff. Okay, we could break down adult versus YA, but there's like no point because at least 2 of the books I read this year were YA, and maybe 3. It's a little hard. There was one I wasn't sure about, and everything else is adult lit because like I don't care much about YA. The only major I don't really see any of this changing next year. Or 2019. The only thing that could skew the YA results basically would be if I decide I want to actually read one of the young adult series I was into when I was younger and like finish it. Like there's one I really want to finish because the author died a few years ago, and so like the whole thing is finished. It's 12 books and I have not read 11 and 12, but I want to reread the whole thing. So if I did that within a year, like it would look like I read a ton of YA and I don't. I don't avoid it completely, it's just like it doesn't really come up in what I feel like reading that often. Okay, so I came up with some other stats on here, authors that I repeated in 2018, because I was like, oh, I could look at what authors have I read before, and what authors have, and it was like, oh, I haven't read almost any of these authors before, because I just like, I just read books, man. I don't know. There are certain authors that I'm making an effort to read all of their stuff here and there. So the authors I have read before this year, before there were 11 books at least, and then authors that were new to me, 27, although the actual number would be probably much greater than that because I wasn't actually counting like every single author of the various short stories. I was just kind of going, I don't want to count that. So it's definitely more than 27. And for authors I repeated in 2018, what I meant by that was, were there any authors I read more than once in this year? Well, I read more than one book by James S.A. Corey and more than one book by China Miéville, but I think, well, I guess I read more than one thing by Ken Liu, because I read his short stories, Paper Menagerie collection, but then also he wrote one of those Star Wars ones. But yeah, as far as actual books, it's these 2 guys. And I also counted that I read at least approximately 13 books with at least one queer character, which doesn't mean that they were the main character, but that there was somebody there and that I remembered it while I was looking at the book list. And that covers a lot of stuff. Okay, so I made this list of like superlatives, basically, like to try and just make it fun. And I'm going to go through this, not in the order I wrote it. So first of all, some ones that are pretty just like cut and dry statistics, like it's not my opinion. The longest book and the shortest book. So the longest book I read this year was City of the Century by Donald L. Miller, 704 pages. And, okay, confession, this is a stat that Goodreads has told me, and it probably includes the extended works cited section at the end of the book, and I did not read all that, but whatever. We're still saying it's the longest book I read this year, because technically it is. It's a nonfiction book about the history of the city of Chicago, mostly centered on the events of the 19th century. So, I loved that book. It was fascinating. It was a contender for my favorite nonfiction book of the year. But yeah, it was really great. Like, if that's what you want to read about, it's an excellent choice. And it was, well, I keep joking because, like, my sister read most of it too. She hasn't finished it yet, but, like, she read it, and I was joking with her, like, they should write a sequel. Like, Donald L. Miller should write a sequel, because you know what? The 20th century is over, and it's been over for, like, a while now. And I feel like we've kind of, we know what happened in it, and, like, I want to read another big-ass book about Chicago by this guy. I love Chicago. It's my favorite city. Okay, shortest book, again, according to Goodreads, was The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is like, it's 128 pages. I own this one, so I checked that. 128 pages. Oh my god. So short. Looks like not even a book. Looks like a novella. Okay, and another indisputable stat. The oldest book I read this year was 1984 by George Orwell, which was published in 1949. Yeah, so, like, yeah. Alright, so then some stuff that's more subjective. Let me see, where should we start? Okay, so my favorite nonfiction book this year was Pale Rider by Laura Spinney. Pale Rider is a book about the Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918. Super interesting. Like, the book covered just about every aspect you could imagine, from, like, the science of viruses and the flu specifically, and how those things spread, and how vaccines work, and what was known about them at the time, and what they actually do to you physically, through, like, how this was affected by troop movements post-World War I, the different waves of the pandemic. There were like 3, I think. Speculations on where it began, which was not Spain. Why it's called the Spanish epidemic, in English. It is not called that in every language. And, like, stuff about art and books and just it was really good. I got it for Christmas, and I basically read it immediately and just finished it at the beginning of 2018, like in some time. Because, it took a little while to read, because it's, like, nonfiction. Those always take a little while to read. But, it was really good. Yeah, so that's my favorite nonfiction. My favorite book is a really hard choice, because I've been trying over the last couple years to rate things on Goodreads, like, a little bit less enthusiastically. Like, okay, basically, I had to look at it, and when you're on Goodreads and you're kind of hovering the mouse over the stars, a little blurb pops up, and so, like, basically 1 star is did not like it, 2 is it was okay, 3 is liked it, 4 is really liked it, and 5 is it was amazing. So I've been trying to use those to gauge how I judge things. So, like, a 3 stars is basically just, I liked it. It was fine. So 5 stars is like, this book, I was obsessed with it. It blew me away. I fucking loved it. And, like, I rated 2 things 5 stars this year. And it's like, which one do I pick for my favorite? I don't fucking know. It's either The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon or Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. And, like, I talked about those earlier. Like, I read those during the time when I started making these videos. But, like, they were so good. They were both so good. Yeah. They also don't have super high ratings on average on Goodreads, and I'm like, what? Why does Yiddish Policeman's Union only have like a 3.7 or whatever? I'm like, are you high? This book is amazing. Whatever. But I definitely want to read more by Michael Chabon. And China Miéville's already one of my favorites, so I'm definitely, obviously, going to read more by him. Of course, I've got my eye on, like, Kraken right now. There's one called Kraken, and I don't know what it's about, but it's probably about a Kraken, so that sounds cool. Okay. So I cannot decide what my favorite was. What was the funniest book? So I don't read a lot of really funny stuff. Most of the stuff I read is kind of, I wouldn't say super, I mean, I don't read stuff that's super dark most of the time, but, like, I mean, how does one even judge that, right? I don't read a ton of thrillers, but I do read books that have, like, space action happening, and, like, terrible things, and murder sometimes, and even just characters reacting to, like, just the crazy shit happening in their lives. Yeah, so, I don't know, maybe I do read a lot of more kind of depressing stuff, but, like, I do. So, anyway, I decided to say that the funniest book I read was From a Certain Point of View, which was that Star Wars 40th anniversary, like, short stories anthology, because I do remember it genuinely making me laugh, and, like, a lot of these other books I don't think I laughed much while I was reading them. The saddest book I read this year. So that one I was scrolling through the book list, like, which of these do I remember crying repeated times while reading? And, like, Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Like, a lot of those books made me cry. Or those stories made me cry. Like, but I'm a big, like, softie. But I also kind of felt like some of these categories I just wasn't even looking at nonfiction. I was just like, look, nonfiction doesn't really get a say because, well, because, like, for saddest, for example, it's like, this stuff actually happened, so that's, like, a number of the nonfiction books made me cry while I was driving, so that's good. But, yeah, sticking with fiction, Paper Menagerie. And also sticking with fiction, Most Fucked Up. So, like, I was just kind of like, this is a compliment, by the way. Which of these books had the most, like, deeply fucked up shit in it? Like, let's stay away from nonfiction, because nonfiction, like, the fact that the things in the nonfiction books actually happened, including, like, just unbelievably awful. Like, I mean, it's history, so, like, there's just so much shit. Yeah, like, that's always gonna win, so that's not even fair. So, fiction-wise, I decided I would probably go with Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer, which is a little unfair because one of those fucked up things is the Holocaust, but it's still fiction. Yeah, there's some shit in that book. Oh my god. I really enjoyed it, for the record. Like, I thought it was a really good book. And I'm glad that I finally read it. And actually, that book was really funny, too. But, yeah, I don't know. Also, like, just gonna throw this out here, because I didn't make a video for that one, because I hadn't started it yet. But, like, did anybody else get to the last letter from, Alex and think he was in love with Jonathan? Like, literally, I read that part and I was like, is he in love with him? And then it didn't come up in any more solid way before the book ended, and I was like, I'm like, I need somebody to agree with me that I didn't just, like, make this up. Like, whatever. That's my interpretation. Apparently there's a movie of that, and I'm trying to decide if I want to see it, because, I don't know, Elijah Wood plays Jonathan Safran Foer, who is a character in the book and also the author, don't ask. Like, that's kind of a weird casting choice. Whatever. Okay. let's finish this. So, just a couple more. My favorite cover. So I was like, oh, I'll do a favorite cover. I can't decide. Like, there are so many great ones. Like, the Essex Serpent has a really cool design on the cover. It has, like, the serpent that has the letters on it, and then it has just a bunch of, like, flowers and whatnot around it, and it's just, like, a really, really cool. Let's Talk About Love has just great cover design that caught my eye. It resembles the ace flag in colors, and, like, that's at least a fair amount of the reason why I ended up reading it. The Yiddish Policeman's Union, like, the cover and just the book jacket in general incorporates, like, Jewish symbols with, like, First Nations, general Alaskan, like, that kind of area symbols. So, like, I mean, I don't know a ton about either of those things, but I was still picking up on it. Looks like, you know, like, the design that the people and the animals on totem poles have, for example, like, the way that they look. So I just thought that was really cool looking. I really like the cover of Perdido Street Station because it's got like kind of a city, and it's got this bird wing. Some of them are really boring, like the cover of Heartsick is like fucking nothing. But there were a lot of good ones. But the ones that I mentioned are like the contenders for the top spot, I think. Okay. So what was my least favorite book? That's the only one I haven't actually read yet. Okay. I was also going to try and do a book I expected to like but didn't, but those are the same one. I did not like Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. I don't know, like, I thought I would. I mean, the whole reason I read it is because it was on my to-read shelf on Goodreads, and I was looking through that for something to order on audiobook from the library. And that one came up, and they had one, so I was like, okay, I'll listen to it. And it was in there because a friend of mine read it in college, and I saw her carrying it around, and I just thought the title was great, like, Special Topics in Calamity Physics. I mean, spoilers, like, the girl is she's very academic, and so is her father, but neither of them are physicists. Yeah, I didn't like it. It took too long to get to the murder mystery. I found the father insufferable, which I think he was supposed to be, but, like, I still didn't enjoy reading it. And I didn't like the main character, Blue, very much. And I didn't like how much of it was just about her awful friends who all sucked. And I legitimately wanted bad things, and maybe even death, to happen to one of them, because, like, he didn't get a single sympathetic scene. I couldn't stand this kid. I, like, was at a point where I was trying to convince myself that he was having an affair with the teacher. And by the way, these are high school students. So I was, like, trying to convince myself that this kid was having an affair with his teacher, and that was going to explain why he was such a dick all the time, because he's, like, going through some shit. But he wasn't, and there was no explanation. It was just like, he's an asshole. And, okay, fine. The thing is about the book that besides pacing, of just taking too fucking long for anything to happen, I don't think it was actually bad. I just didn't like it. I don't know. I got mad at it. I didn't enjoy it, and I feel like I was deceived because it's such a good title. Such a good title. Okay. But I think that's about it. Yeah. That's about it. 2018. So for 2019, I want to read more books about science. I am going to try and read 39 books, which is frightening. That's a lot. I don't know how I did 38 this year, but somehow I did, so we'll see if it's at all possible. And there's authors that I haven't read in a while. Like, I want to read Vonnegut, and I want to read Philip K. Dick. Like, it's been years since I've read either of them for some reason, so I want to maybe remember that. There's a handful of sci-fi authors I haven't read, or I've read very little from, that I want to check out this year if I can remember. I'd like to read something else by Lee Brackett, something else by Alfred Bester, something else by Fritz Leiber. Maybe it's Lieber. More by Martha Wells. And then my usual favorite authors list. I'm certainly going to read more China Miéville. I'm going to try and read more Ursula K. Le Guin. And I'm going to continue with my challenge of reading books I own and haven't read. And currently, Seven Pillars of Wisdom is sitting on my floor with a bookmark in it. I'm going to start it after I read something else, but I'm getting to it. So, yeah, I don't know, I had a good year. I read books, I enjoyed them, I found some new authors. Oh, I guess I should say I would love to read more by Michael Chabon, and I'm totally going to. And Ken Liu as well. Like, yeah, so I found some authors that I really enjoy that I hadn't read before. And, yeah, I don't know. I have a whole bunch of books on my Goodreads to read shelf. I have, as I just went through, a whole list of authors I want to read more from. Doesn't matter what book particularly. And, so I'm just going to keep doing this. And, I mean, even if I didn't keep doing this, I would still be reading. But, yeah, I will see you when I see you.